we go. Okay, figured it out, clicking. Obviously acknowledge all partner institutions, RAIN and NIFA for all of this project work. And so a little background on the rise of resistant weeds. How did we get here? Why do farmers care about this? And then where the weeds are located. First question, how did we get here? Three kind of broad reasons I've gathered over time that have fed into the rise of the weeds. The first being monoculture. So pests generally prefer certain populations over others. And so large swaths of similar crops or same rotations planted over and over and over again give weeds a great chance to establish their populations and figure out how to kind of fight against the crops or the resources. The second reason is the over-reliance on single herbicides or single strategies, single chemical strategies. And the middle graphic kind of gets at that process of you spray an herbicide, but there is a resistant plant. Resistant plant survives, set seed next year, more resistant plants. Eventually, you're probably going to have a majority resistant weed population in your field. And then the third reason is the decreased use of non-chemical weed control methods. So that goes hand in hand with the increased chemical use. Now, why should farmers care? So weeds in a field, they're going to interfere with your crop growth. Decreased crop growth is going to decrease your yields most likely, and that's going to affect your revenues and bottom line profitability. And then where are the weeds located? I've included two maps. The top map is a nationwide map. It's from 2016, and it identifies the herbicide resistant weeds by state. And I wanted to include this just to show that this is not a localized problem. It's stretched across the nation, and it does affect farmers in every corner, really. And the bottom map is more zoomed in on the southeast, and this was a survey of cotton farmers, I believe, of identifying hotspots of resistant weeds. So clearly Texas Panhandle, Mississippi Delta, North Carolina, South Georgia. But where there's a problem, there's an opportunity for farmers. So I included this graph to kind of succinctly get at the dynamic of what we're trying to do, which is if we assume that there's a weed population in a field, but it's majority non-resistant, which is your red curve, it's going to be more manageable, and you're most likely not going to see too much of a significant yield penalty. But as the weed population transitions to become more resistant, we move into a less manageable area. We see more significant yield penalties. The opportunity here for farmers is that they can choose cropping systems that reduce the presence of resistant weeds and reduce the presence of weeds overall. So that's the big opportunity for farmers. This is not a new problem. It's been around for a while. Previous research has focused mostly on estimating cost of infestations on single farms, kind of looking at different strategies to eradicate them. And then some have also incorporated game theory when it comes to framing the issue and trying to see how the two work together dynamically to overcome the problem. The objectives of this research that I'm doing is to determine optimal cropping system strategies. So this includes crop rotations and till versus no-till to manage resistant weeds on a single farm. So it's pretty straightforward. But to do this, I had to find some data. So I simulated 3 cropping systems using the Almanac Crop Simulator. It's from USDA ARS. I simulated these systems as if they were grown in Canadian County. So that's where El Reno is. I simulated 3 different systems, a wheat fallow, a wheat soybean, and a wheat sorghum system. And these were all simulated under a conventional tillage scenario as well as a no-till scenario, and under 3 different levels of weed densities, so low, medium, high, just to see how the yields change throughout that progression. So we have our crops. Now I have to simulate the weeds competing with the crops. I chose 2 different weeds. We have Palmer amaranth, which is the summer annual. It's pigweed. It's your direct competition with your soybean and sorghum. And I chose horseweed, which is your winter annual, and that's going to be your direct competitor with your winter wheat. I've included some summary statistics. It's a lot. I don't love tables, but I still included it. So the yield is expressed in tons per hectare, returns in dollars per hectare. Returns were calculated using OSU's enterprise budgets to incorporate all the costs of managing the operation. Prices are assumed to be current day prices. And so to point out, under a low weed density, every system is pretty comparable when you compare their till to their no-till counterpart. As you move or progress up the weed density levels, that's when you start to see a little bit of difference between the no-till versus till strategies. So moving on into the optimization, we're assuming that farmers maximize their net returns. So this optimization problem was originally formulated in Burton Allison paper in 1963, a while ago, but it has been used throughout time to try to identify optimal cropping systems with respect to various amounts of information. So I did 3 things with the optimization. First, I just ran the optimization as using the averages I showed on the previous slide. Second, to introduce some price stochasticity, I bootstrapped my prices 1,000 times, recalculated all my returns 1,000 times, and then ran the optimization 1,000 times over to see kind of as these prices change, how is this going to affect the preferred cropping system. And then finally, I added more stochasticity into it. We kept our bootstrap prices, and then we drew our yields from a multivariate normal distribution to also add to see, okay, well, different kinds of yield combinations and different kinds of price combinations, how is that going to affect our preferred cropping system? Again, did that 1,000 times, recalculate your returns, optimize 1,000 more times. So our results, so just looking at just using our averages, when you are exhibiting a low weed density, the preferred system seems to be a wheat, soybean, no-till system. As you move up in weed density, you're still keeping that rotation of a wheat, soybean, but your tillage switches to conventional till as opposed to no-till. Again, this is just with the averages. Looking down to our price bootstrap round. So how I got this was I ran this 1,000 times and then divided how many times each system was preferred over the total to kind of get a percentage of preference, I guess you could say. So clearly in the low density, the no-till wheat soybean rotation is still absolutely preferred over all of those 1,000 runs. Moving into medium, it seems to flip-flop a bit between your wheat soybean till and your wheat fallow till. You're still keeping the conventional tillage though. And then in your high, you're still flip-flopping between the wheat fallow and wheat soybean till. So again, this is your randomness in price, but you're still holding your yield at your average numbers. And then I think the most interesting one here is when we kind of let everything vary a bit, where we are keeping our prices kind of random, and then we're drawing our yields from our multivariate distribution. So in our low scenario, 37 times out of 100, it's preferred to plant a no-till wheat soybean. But now here comes your wheat sorghum in also as a potential preferred system as well with 33 times out of 100. And then into your medium, clearly in the wheat soybean space with 39 times out of 100, you're still going to choose your wheat soybean no-till. So it kind of shows a shift as we kind of see all these different combinations between the yields and the prices, because that's in agriculture, it's all dynamic anyway. And then in our high scenario, we get back to what we saw previously, which is you're kind of going to be choosing in terms of preference between the wheat soybean till and the wheat fallow till. So the conclusions, double cropping systems are preferred when compared to wheat fallow systems more times than not. And I think this could, I don't know, totally explained by 2 reasons, but summer crops do help deter weeds by establishing canopy cover. And I'm definitely not an agronomist, so that's what I've read. And then summer crops, from an economic standpoint, they do offer an additional revenue source that you would not be realizing if you were to fallow the ground. So that does feed into perhaps the preference of a system. So in high weed density, conventional till seems to be preferred. In a low weed density, no till is preferred. In medium, it's more of a toss up, especially when we think back to the price bootstrap and that multivariate normal draws. So our extensions is to incorporate carryover effects of managing weeds. That's kind of what's next, because that is what's missing. Is through time, how are our strategies going to affect the weed populations? And then also to incorporate, inter and intraseasonal weed management strategies of, okay, if you're in the middle of the season and you see, an uptick and you make a certain decision, how is that going to affect moving through the season? So thank you. Questions? I tried to be brief. I know we're going to lunch.
Great, Chellie, thank you. Question, Jason?
So your crop simulation was you planted wheat, harvested wheat, immediately planted soybeans or milo, harvested the soybeans or milo, and then that same fall you planted wheat.
So I did I think it was up early this morning, but it was a wheat, soybean, wheat fallow, wheat, soybean, wheat fallow. So it was like a